So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Badea Jahari. I'm a senior manager with Deloitte. I lead our healthcare, life science, tech, and innovation practice across the prairies, and I also have a national role. And I'm going to pass it off to Jason, our first panelist, to introduce himself. Jason?
Hi. I don't think this is on. Oh, it is on. My name is Jason Ding. I'm the Chief Business Officer of Entos Pharmaceuticals. We're a biotech company based here in Edmonton. But prior, actually, to my role, so I joined about a year and a half ago, I was the lead national partner for mergers and acquisitions for healthcare and life sciences for Deloitte across Canada.
Ted.
Yeah, thank you. Ted Curry. I own a consulting firm here in Edmonton called Insight. We do work with small, medium-sized businesses in terms of strategic planning, market growth, brand strategy, and then a lot of communication support around mergers and acquisitions.
Eric.
Thanks, Badea. I'm Alex Dunlop. I'm a Vice President and Client Executive with Marsh Canada here in Edmonton. I've been with Marsh for 4 years now. So Marsh is a world-leading risk advisory and insurance firm, and I act on behalf of my clients as their outsourced risk manager.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to start my first question with Jason. So you've been in the M&A field for a very long time. What key factors that companies here should consider, not just on the buying, selling, but also from a licensing perspective?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, the title of this talk is Mergers and Acquisitions, but if you think about the therapeutic space, licensing is actually the more common approach to some sort of exit or monetization event for companies. And I would say, if you think about diagnostic companies, health tech companies versus therapeutic companies, what drives value between the two of those is quite different. And I'll say healthcare companies as well. So if we start with healthcare companies, and so we've done transactions, or I've been involved in transactions, lots of healthcare transactions in pharmacy, dental, sleep, fertility, dermatology. What drives that is primarily, EBITDA, so cash flow related to the business. And valuations are, really a product of scarcity of really well-run businesses within that space. Typical acquirers are usually private equity firms that really, like sort of that steady cash flow, some moderate growth, and looking to consolidate and sort of generate, synergies within that space. If you think about sort of the tech side and you're looking at companies that are sort of in that digital tech diagnostic space, what we're seeing is that many companies in that space are waiting to see those startups, those younger companies, generate cash flow. There's a lot of risk in commercializing, and so what we're seeing is that the medical device companies, the diagnostic companies, are just sort of waiting to make sure that you're able to commercialize, that there's a demand for the product. They're willing to pay a little bit more, they're willing to come in a little bit later and pay up, but they don't want to have to go through the risk of commercializing, so they want to see that commercial effort first. Again, what we see there is some sort of multiple EBITDA, usually a bit bigger, because the growth curve is much larger. And that's usually sort of what's driving the valuation there. On the therapeutic side, and Arden brought it up in the last discussion, it's really around data, right? So if you have data that demonstrates that your potential therapeutic, which has to go through another 10 to 12, maybe 14 years of clinical trials, human evidence trials, whatever it is, in order to demonstrate efficacy, that data is what drives value. And so, it's important to sort of think about, what is the value case? What are the value inflection points for your company as you go forward? Maybe my last point is when we thought about M&A and we thought about valuations, what was really, I think the way that we like to think about valuations was about quality of cash flow and growth of cash flow. So if you sort of split up the value of your company between those two things, that is sort of what will drive the value of your business. So that's supplier power, recession resistance, vendor power, sort of a bunch of sort of those aspects of the business in terms of quality of the cash flow that you're generating. And then you think about growth of cash flow, you're thinking about, what does that growth curve look like? Are you able to sort of predict that growth curve? What does that retention rate look like? And what is the nature of the revenues that you're generating? Is it SaaS or is it project-based or is it otherwise?
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to do a little shameless plug here for the Bio Alberta Life Sciences report that came out about a week ago. It showed over $2 billion of transactions that took place here in Alberta, both in the private and public sector. And we've seen a lot of the M&A landscape evolve. So Ted, this question is for you. How have you seen the M&A landscape, both just from a financial and non-financial perspective, change over the last few years?
Yeah, great question. I think with our client base, which is mostly small, medium-sized businesses, three major things. One is happening outside of Alberta as well, but just the demographic shift that everyone's been talking about with, founders that are baby boomers aging out is happening. Like, there's lots of businesses now that are turning over just due to the age of the founder, and that's maybe less relevant with startups that tend to have a younger profile, but it's starting to drive other activity and spin off throughout the market. So that wave has now reached Alberta, which historically has a younger population, but you've now got lots of businesses that have been in someone's hand for 10, 20, 30 years, and there's starting to be an exit, and a necessary exit, whether that's due to just desire to monetize the business or life issues or health issues or other things like that are causing founders to exit. More relevant maybe to this audience, the other trend would be that we've seen the size of deal come down a lot. Like, I think if you look historically, M&A was always sort of this big business, big corporations doing deals. Now there's lots of small businesses, even some of them barely out of the startup phase, that are involved in transactions, and whether they're being bought up by larger businesses, but sometimes it's even small businesses merging or partnering with other smaller businesses. And we've seen a real change in that. So you get deal sizes now that are happening at what historically would have seemed too small a level to warrant doing an acquisition, starting to happen. We've seen a lot of that, and I think that's going to continue. It's a key part of a lot of businesses' growth strategy to get where they want to go faster. To try to do everything through organic growth sometimes just takes too long. And the third piece I think that would be relevant for this group also is just the increasing interest the last 5 or 10 years of out-of-market players in Alberta. So you're starting to see, from a private equity standpoint, businesses and companies that are, Eastern Canada, the U.S., that are investing into Alberta, as well as, strategic buyers looking to partner. And that historically was driven a lot with energy services, but we're now seeing it in technology and health and other spaces as well. And I think that will continue to happen as we move forward.
Thank you, Ted. Alex, we were just speaking actually right before this. You've worked on some really incredible projects. Some are confidential. But for those entrepreneurs we have here today, could you share maybe some nuggets of advice when it comes to considerations for not just an M&A, but based on your experience and being on some of these deals?
That's a great question, Badea. Thank you. So I'm going to look at this from the lens of risk management. I think in the previous panel, you heard risk a lot. And there's a common principle amongst, risk management professionals that if you're to take two businesses side by side, same industry, same sector, same geography, and one will formally apply the principles of risk management and one will not, the theory is quite prevalent that the one that has actually implemented those principles will be actually more valuable through either through acquisition or through some sort of funding events. Because most of the businesses that are looking to make these acquisitions, they have formal risk management practices in their business, and they understand it. And if you have those in your own, they'll understand those principles, and you should, in theory, experience multiples that are higher. And I can say firsthand, Edmonton-grown businesses have done quite well in this regard. And there's a business that was sold from this region not that long ago, and in its sector, it experienced the highest multiple ever paid in that particular sector, and the valuation itself was, it's a private deal, but it is quite, it is beyond any sort of numbers we can comprehend. So yeah, the fundamentals of risk management, try to implement those early on, and it will be realized, the gains will be realized in the long term for sure.
Thank you. Jason, back to you. So we've worked together previously at Deloitte, and you have a ton of experience in the M&A. And you also have some pretty incredible war stories, some lessons learned. Or maybe you can delve into, the recent Entos deal that took place over the last couple of years. Really, it's your choice where you want to start.
So from a lessons learned perspective, maybe I'll give you something that is near and dear to my heart right now. So just for those of you that don't know, Entos basically has we'll call it a platform technology that supports basically delivery of genetic cargo. So if you think about, let's say, the mRNA vaccine, you've got the mRNA in the middle, and then it's encapsulated with a delivery vehicle in order to deliver that vaccine. And so our technology is competitive to that delivery vehicle. And one of the interesting things, I think, and this is, I think, something that's going to be relevant for many of you in the audience as well, is we get into lots of pharma discussions who have really interesting cargo that they want to deliver, and we end up in bake-offs with a whole bunch of other companies who claim to have technologies that can do what we can do, right? So it's competitive. There are lots of different solutions. Ours is, of course, patented and proprietary, but there's lots of potential ways to skin the cat. And so one of the things that we ended up running into is a situation where we would do a deal, a collaboration. We would sign basically a research agreement with a large pharma company. And those agreements generally went like this. So they would take exclusivity, right? They would say, we're gonna spend money on studies with you. And so we want exclusivity over the target that we're going after. Number two, we want to own the data, or at least co-own the data. So you actually are not allowed to go and shop this amazing data to anyone else. We own it, and we don't want you, right, going out to anyone else trying to pitch sort of the amazing things that your technology can do. And we create a study plan, and they basically say, yeah, so these are the studies that we want, and based at the end of that, let's take a look at what we're going to do, hopefully a deal. The problem with that is we end up in these situations where we're in these bake-offs for a really long time, right? We're over and over again, they give us an experiment to do, we run the experiment, we're successful, and they're like, okay, this is great, but let's try the next one, and let's try the next one, and let's try the next one, and let's try the next one. And so about a year and a half ago, we basically said, look, I mean, this is actually getting untenable. Like we're constantly doing these experiments over and over again, and we're taking on all the risk related to running these experiments and not being able to share the data. And they have all of the benefit because they're sitting there basically saying, well, let's just run an experiment and de-risk, right, the product further, and then we'll make a decision on whether or not we want to go ahead, or we're just going to do another study to de-risk it further for them. So we tried an experiment where we basically said, okay, no more research agreements with anyone. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a study plan, go to all of the partners and basically say, we're going to run all of our own experiments. So this is the study plan that we're going to create, that we're going to do. This is the data we think we're going to get out of it. What do you want to see in this study plan that will help you make a decision on whether or not you want to do a deal? And so we actually went to 20 pharma companies. We got input from them, and we basically said, we don't care. If you want a rabbit study instead of a mouse study, if you want to add another arm, right, of experimentation to the study, do it. Just tell us, and we'll add it. We'll run the experiments, and then we'll go from there. And the hope was that we would run all the experiments, show them the data, and basically have them bid, rather than continually sort of going through these one-off, right, experiments. We would own the data. We could share that data with everyone. No one had exclusivity, which meant that we had multiple bidders potentially for, right, different targets, which hopefully would drive up value. In the end, and this has sort of been a year and a half long experiment, what we learned is that it was great. We presented the data, and then the pharma companies basically came back and said, we still need to test it in our hands. Like, if we never test it in our hands, it's too much risk. Even though you've used a third-party CRO, even though you've used another group to do the work, we still need to test it. So we're ending up now back in these research agreements. Now I think we've shortened our timeline. We've definitely learned a lot, and we've definitely got a couple of interesting, we'll call it horse races between a couple of parties who all want the same targets. But that was a bit of a lesson learned for us. And I think we're entering into, and I tell the story only because I think we're entering into, and maybe I don't want to be the bearer of gloom and doom, but we're entering into a recessionary period where the large corporations with all of the power, right, to do that deal or make a decision on that deal can basically hold out for much longer than the small companies can. And so, just thinking through and trying to be innovative around how do you push for deals, how do you get those deals done, how do you drive, and so right now our discussions with the pharma companies are, we need to be clear on what the goalposts are. So if if you're reproducing our results, you get this data, like this is when we're going to get deal terms, and if you get this data, this is when we sign a deal. So we've been, I would say, much more firm around when we're expecting deal terms and how we're expecting to sort of move forward on a transaction. But I think whether it's software or energy or whatever, I think you've got this situation where everyone's looking. The large corporates are always looking to de-risk to as low as possible, and you've got to find innovative ways to drive that sale.
So to build on that, Ted, what are some key takeaways you'd like to share here with some of the entrepreneurs in the room as they're trying to navigate the complex M&A landscape?
If you're gonna, our experience is that most businesses that start to get involved in M&A, they put all of their effort, understandably, because if you don't get a deal done, you haven't really got into the space, but it's all into what has to happen to get to close, and there's not a lot of effort or time spent into what's going to happen after that, and that's usually where everything goes wrong. So our experience is that you need to put a little bit of attention into what's going to happen afterwards to make it work. The effort pre-deal does get you to close, but success off that transaction only happens if you've got a plan going into that. And the three biggest lesson learned from the kind of work that we do would be, one is around communications. Do you actually have a plan to communicate about the transaction internally and externally? Usually the people that are involved in trying to navigate an M&A deal have been at it for months, if not years, and they understand it really, really well, but they just assume everyone else will just get it, and they don't. And so how are you going to communicate effectively around that? How are you going to bring your team up to speed? How are you going to bring your customers up to speed? Make sure that the market understands what you're doing, why you're doing it. And then if you're merging or acquiring, all the same thing is then true of the business that you're partnering with or that you're bringing in. There's a whole set of stakeholders on there and that need to be communicated to. So communication would be one. Number two, do you have an integration plan? So many deals look great on paper, then you get into the integration and things start to go sideways. It's usually around issues around culture, issues around change management, issues around customer fit with new products or services. You need to proactively plan for that and work through that. And it's a time-consuming process. Like I would say minimum 6 to 8 months post-deal, you're going to be dealing with those things. And you need to have a plan that runs through that, as opposed to a lot of founders I've seen the deal closes and sort of a week later they feel like, okay, great, on to the next thing. It doesn't work that way, and then they wonder why the deal didn't pay off and why 1 + 1 wasn't 3. In fact, I've seen them where 1 + 1 isn't even 2 a year or 2 years in, because they've eroded deal value by not putting the time into the integration plan. So communicate, one, integrate, have a good plan for that. And then 3 would be, what's the post-deal growth plan? Because most of the deals only really pay off if you can take the product, the service, the technology, and integrate it or bolt it onto something else and then get value off of that. So you need to have a plan on how you're going to grow that. It doesn't happen organically just because, in theory, there looks like there's some synergy between the two businesses or the technology or the product or the service. There needs to be a sales and marketing strategy to grow that business after the transaction is done. So I think if you are going to consider this space, it's not just about the mechanics of getting a deal closed. It's also about, how do I communicate that, how do I integrate that, and how do I build a plan for growth post-deal.
Ted, you set up the next question so smoothly, so thank you. Alex, this is more on the risk side. So post-deal, because as Ted said, most people focus on the pre-deal and during. What are some of the challenges or perhaps opportunities that you've seen happen, and maybe some key takeaways here for the crowd?
Yeah, thanks for the lead up, Ted. I appreciate that. So obviously, being on the risk and insurance side, I both unfortunate and fortunate, I get to see, claims and various events that sort of unfold when things don't work out as planned, right? So I would say, looking to the negative and then the positive. So the negative often that I see is just not understanding what it is you actually have and what it is that you're contractually obligated to fulfill. So the number of times, most of this will be picked up through due diligence in the acquisition process, but every now and again, something will slip through the cracks. And one of the things that I see most often than not is like key supplier and vendor contracts. So these would be critical individuals and businesses that are part of you making whatever it is you do, that are not really wanting to participate with the new future of whatever the new future is. And this happens more often than not, right? So that's definitely a key, consideration. How are my key suppliers key vendors, key customers, how are they going to react when they see that I'm partnering up with XYZ Corporation or I've been acquired by XYZ Corp? That's a really, really important piece. The other part is what your contractual obligations are, not just in the vendor-supplier agreements, but with everything, right? So the number of agreements and license agreements. Maybe you have something with the university or here with Edmonton Unlimited. I mean, there's all sorts of agreements that you will sign, throughout the growth portion of your business, and you'll do these things just to get over the next hurdle. But sometimes these things will come and they will show up in the future as being either a positive or a negative. I think now sort of switching over to the positive, what I often see more than not is that you're expanding your horizons beyond what you ever could have possibly, imagined when you're partnering with a global enterprise. If they're deciding to get you past, technology readiness to level 7 through to 10, for example, your eyes will be opened up to new processes and potential resources, and you'll access, people and places that you may never been able to. And I think when it comes to health and tech, should it work well and should the partners be aligned with your own vision, then in theory, that's what it is you want to have. If you're not planning an exit, but you're planning the next stage, right? So I think that would be it in terms of that.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to go to the audience. Does anyone have a question for our fantastic panelists? Okay.
Hi, my question is for Alex. If you could expand a little bit on what you mean by risk management, because you mentioned all of the attributes or potential benefits of getting on it early. But if you could just tell us a little bit about what you mean by what exactly risk management would be.
I knew that was, thank you. So I didn't put him in the crowd, by the way. So we manage our risk every single day. We get into our car, we make our decisions. We're doing it inherently just by coming here, for example. But risk management is a formal process of analyzing, assessing, and mitigating risk. And when you formalize the process, you take a lot of time to understand. I mean, from a business perspective, like you really, really want to understand what the company killers are. What are the things that could happen to me as a business owner that will turn the lights off entirely? You want to understand what those are, and you want to understand what the mitigation efforts you can do to actually prevent that from happening. Because often we focus in on climate change and natural catastrophe, and these things happen and we see it on the news all the time. But the things that actually close the doors are things that we often don't even anticipate. And so, I mean, the formal process, it starts with a risk registry, putting down all the different things that could happen, analyzing them. What are the mitigation responses I can do? And then you can start to map them. I mean, all of these tools, that's the beauty of the internet today, is that, we had to learn this in a textbook in university classroom, but all the materials are out there. From a risk mapping to a heat mapping, and I would focus on the things that are not the things that are so far out there that they'll never happen, but the things that could happen and would be, significantly detrimental to the business success for sure.
Thank you, Alex. I know, Christine, you had a question.
Thank you. So each one of the panelists, I just maybe wanted to ask, so when you go from idea to commercialization and you're making an investment into yourself as a company, we understand that you don't want to fall into the valley of death because you can't find the right resources, or you end up into a post-merger and acquisition litigation because some of the stuff that you didn't have a line of sight on kind of came to bite you in the butt. But what would you suggest as good investments of time and company or corporate infrastructure that ideators or founders should make an investment into in order to be able to meet their strategic objectives, hit their growth plan, but make sure that if they do decide that they want to enter into a merger or acquisition, that they are seen in a more mature business position than when they first started?
That was a mouthful, Christine. Thank you. So this is to the entire panel? Okay. Jason, do you want to start?
That's a tough one. I mean, so I've been involved in lots of deals where companies are missing pieces, right? So just because you don't have a head of business development or, your some part of your business is missing and is something that has to be worked on, doesn't necessarily mean you're not saleable, right? I would say there was a discussion again in the last panel around strategy, which I think is really important. So out of everything that you could possibly do, I think, to make your business saleable, it's around that differentiation. So understand, why are you different? Why are you disruptive? How are you, what are the competitive advantages? And you could even go simpler than that, and it is, why do people pick you versus somebody else, right? And so answering that question and really understanding that is, what you are articulating then to venture capital or to, a future, acquirer. If you can answer that question, and then answer actually the second one after that, which is about growth. So what is it that makes you different? And then how do I scale what it is that makes me different? And what does that growth path look like? Then you're interesting, right? If you don't have sort of that capability to scale, if you don't understand where you're going, if you can't sort of take those sort of key gems within your business and be able to sort of understand how you're taking that into a new service, a new product, a new geography, then you're kind of losing the second half of that. So if you could sort of, and then so everything else around your question related to infrastructure should be around those two pieces.
Ted?
Yeah, as a strategy consultant, I endorse that answer. Yeah, I would agree 100% with what you said, Jason. So maybe to add a few other things that I think you would want to consider. The two things that we see most businesses fail to invest in the most, because it just feels like they don't have the time or the money or the effort, but I think that really set them up well for sale, but also just to grow their business regardless. Once you've got your strategy and your growth plan in place, one is just like the management team. Like, are you investing in your best people? Too many businesses are trying to cut corners because, well, we don't want to add an extra salary, we've got to keep headcount down. But if you don't have great people leading the business, you don't really have a business. You maybe have or you have an idea. So if you really are looking to build a saleable business, I think you've got to invest in a strong leadership group around you as a founder. And secondly would be systems and processes. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, we can get by without that, so we get by with it and we'll do it tomorrow and the next week and the next month. But eventually, the business isn't really scalable if you can't do things internally in a repeatable and consistent manner. So I wholeheartedly agree with the strategy and the growth comments that Jason made. And then I would say invest in management team and invest in systems and processes.
Alex?
I agree with everything said here.
Good insurance, right? Good insurance.
And you definitely have to have good insurance for sure. So I guess something that I find with founders, and having known many and having seen them sold their businesses, is actually accepting very early on that you're doing this for the purpose of an exit at some point. It's coming to the acceptance that you are the founder, you're the creator, and it's your baby, but eventually you have to let it go. And if you're able to do that early on, and a lot of very successful entrepreneurs do that, then you can start to make sure that you have the information that's going to be inevitably needed in a package and ready to go. So not that you have to have a buy package or a sell package or an auction process like ready to go every single week, but I think you want to have the information available at the ready, and also have a narrative that goes with that. And it has to be a narrative that can be expressed by more than one person in the firm. And you talk to the strategy and the leadership part, I think it has to be more than just one person that can sell the business if it ever has to be sold. Because going back to risk, one of the biggest risks is what happens to the business if something happens to you. So if you're not there, the business still has to continue on. So kind of run it with that mindset, and I think the exit I think you'll achieve the valuations that the business wants to achieve in the future for sure.
Thank you, Alex. Any other questions from the audience?
Do I need to stand, or can I just sit down? I think this question is for Alex. You kind of touched on, I think you said after the acquisition or so, the company needs to think about its customers or something like that. Now, from my understanding, when there's a merger and acquisition going on, the buyer or the acquirer typically looks at the potential customers that the business has in order to, understand how big and the growth of the business. But now you're saying that the business itself has to also consider its own customers when the sale is about to happen. So why do they need to do that? Do the customers have a say in how the particular business gets sold?
That's a really good question, and I'm not going to obviously protect the confidentiality because there's a transaction that took place in the United States not that long ago, and so your customer isn't in the data room and isn't aware that you're for sale, and they are also not aware of who you're potentially going to be sold to. So what will happen on an announcement? Either the business has been sold, then your customer becomes aware. And the thing that you may not be able to uncover through the due diligence is that your customer and the buyer of your business has something behind them in the history that is not going to work. And so what I was alluding to with regards to the risk is that there have been times when key customers have been lost because they don't want to do business with the new buyer of your business. That's what I was alluding to. And that is a real risk. And in terms of how you address that, I mean, it's challenging, but it can be done, and it needs to be done through the due diligence process. And sometimes it requires a really, really deep dive, and sometimes it involves actually bringing your critical customer into the process and telling them, hey, listen, like we're for sale, ABC code. It's very rare to see that happen, but if one of your customers is responsible for 85% of your sales, you definitely want to make sure that you've covered that one off for sure. Does that help?
Yeah, hi there. Just maybe two related questions. First one, if let's say you're reasonably in the early stage and maybe you're caught a little bit off guard with a acquisition offer, what would be some of the first few things that you should do to maybe put yourself in the best kind of position? And maybe kind of related to that, how can you best kind of spot if maybe the potential acquirer is really just doing that to get a little bit of a look under your hood and not really in a position to acquire you, but just wants to understand your IP a little bit better?
I'll take that one. So great question, super fun. What I will say is, on the seller side, you always want to be in a position where you have multiple bidders, because that is right. Like, so you can do a valuation exercise, and I use home prices, like residential homes as an example. You could be in Edmonton, your home's worth $400,000, your listing agent sort of comes out and says that's what it's worth, but if you have one bidder at the table and everyone knows that, you're not getting $400,000. Or you're in Vancouver and your house is listed for $1 million, but you got 15 bidders on your lawn, you're getting way more than $1 million, right? So as the seller, you want to be very, very thoughtful about your process, because valuation matters, but your process also matters and makes a big difference to what you end up getting. And so you need to be thoughtful, I think, around, am I ready to sell? Have I actually achieved the inflection points that I can do? How much further can I take this? What does that actually look like? So understanding that path for yourself and your team will help you with whether or not you even want to entertain that offer. And then if you make a decision that you do want to entertain that offer, you want to be thoughtful around whether there are other bidders that you could bring into the process, even if it's one other bidder, just to make sure that the buyer on the other side is not getting an exclusive deal. Because that is like the buyer story every single time is, we love you, we think you're great, we're going to work well together, we'll make this deal super quick, sign this non-disclosure agreement, send us a little bit of stuff, and by the way, we want exclusivity, so don't shop your business to anyone else for the next 6 months, please, because we just want to, and by the way, like, we're going to be super confidential about this, so if you start shopping this business and someone else knows, you're going to lose customers, you're going to lose staff, there's going to be a bunch of uncertainty, so just be exclusive with us, right? That is the typical buyer line, because basically they don't want to overpay and they don't want to have to compete with anyone else for your business. So maybe the last sort of piece of advice on that front end is get an advisor, right? Someone who's done this before, who understands the process, who can help you through, and someone who knows the health space, who maybe can help with generating some of those other bids. On the other side, related to how can you tell if they're just fishing? So what I typically recommend is that you stage how you, or phase how you release confidential information, right? So typically at the very beginning of someone who's actually going through a sales process, they're not going to give everyone their customers, but they might give customer A X, dollars of revenue or percentage of revenue, B, C, D, E. As you see the other side spend money, and we're talking real money, so hiring lawyers, hiring diligence advisors, right? As they spend money, provide you with real offers, then you start releasing more information on your end, right? So you just have to be very careful about how you phase that information so that you're not giving away too much if you don't see that sort of level of spend and commitment from their end. That's generally the approach.
Ted, I know you want to jump in.
I was just going to add, I really like Jason's advice. I would just add that don't underestimate, if you're like, you said like early stage was the term that you used, don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to on your end or your team's end to work through that process. So I think often the answer should be, no, we're not for sale, and we should put our head down and keep growing our business. You should only really look at that if you're serious, because otherwise you'll spend a bunch of time and some money, and a lot of the people that approach you won't be serious, or you won't be able to come to terms. So you've got to really decide where you're at in the process, and are you really looking to sell? Because if someone just phones you out of the blue, but you're going to put time into it, that's time you're not spending growing the business and building a stronger company. So I just think a lot of smaller early stage businesses get distracted by the potential of an offer or the excitement of an offer, and then 6 months later find themselves with no offer, and they sort of spun their wheels for that amount of time. So obviously there's legit times to look at it. There's legit times that you want to be on the market. Things that Jason suggested make a lot of sense, but I think you have to have a really honest question with yourself, because every seller I've worked with, they underestimate the time and the energy and the headspace it takes to go through that process.
I've been hogging the mic here. I would be disciplined with the inflection points, as Jason mentioned. I would know the turning points in your business, or at least what you think they're going to be, and stick to those. And if you have something real, you're going to have way more than just one bidder eventually, especially in this space.
I'm going to add something super quick, and it's one of those things where it's a piece of advice that I often have given to lots of sort of early stage entrepreneurs. When you think about your valuation curve, everyone sort of thinks hockey stick, right? Like bottom left to top right, or some sort of curve. When you're early stage, it's never like that, right? So it's so in life sciences, an example, when you hit your phase 1 trial, or you start your phase 1 trial, you're actually not worth anything more in the middle of that trial than at the beginning of that trial. And when you hit the end of that trial, your inflection point goes like this, right? And that goes the same, I think, with software. Like if you got an alpha version or a beta version, like developing half of a beta version of your software doesn't mean that you've actually increased in value. Only till you get to the end of that version do you actually have an inflection point. And so think about value inflection as steps, not curve. It changes when you start generating EBITDA, you start generating profit. Your EBITDA then becomes some sort of multiple, and then you do see that curve. But early stage, think about steps, and then sort of think about your value inflection points to some of the earlier comments.
I think I'm getting the head nod to close, because I believe there's another event happening at 3 that they need to prep for. So it's been a true pleasure to be your moderator this afternoon. Please give a round of applause to Alex, Ted, and Jason, our phenomenal panelists today. And also, before you leave, on behalf of Health Cities and Edmonton Unlimited and our fantastic Health Innovation Day, a big kudos to Health Cities for putting all of this together. We have Lisa, Becky, and the team. Give the team a big round of applause. And all of our panelists and moderators today as well. We wanted to thank all of them for just being phenomenal. And last but not least, all of you for coming and attending. So thank you so much for participating in Health Innovation Day.